Thank you for watching today. This is Kineer. Welcome to another Starfield video. Since last Sunday when the June update dropped, we've been swimming in some of the most fascinating arguments over creations, mods, and DLC that I've seen in a while. While my instinct is not to advise people to buy or not buy specific DLC, the discussions have raised questions for me. In this video, I'm going to cover the history of pricing for games and DLC adjusted for inflation. I'm going to take a quick look at the Starfield mod and creation ecosystem, and I'm going to compare Starfield entertainment cost per hour to alternatives. Finally, I'm going to offer what I think is a realistic framework for assessing the value of the Trackers Alliance DLC that could help you make a decision on it. So let's get started. So before I dive into this, I do want to say that I'm going to try very hard to maintain a positive and objective attitude about the content and the discussion around it. It's very easy to get wrapped up in the drama surrounding this, and so I don't want to be cynical about this. I want to be objective about this, and I want to basically take apart the pieces that are subject and can be revealed using data and analysis. Now, since this is essentially a one-way dialogue, I'm going to go ahead and tell you 5 ground rules that I'm going to use in order to convey this information to you. The first is, we all have agency or free will or whatever you want to call it. We all get to decide whether we're going to buy or not buy anything that comes in front of us. We're not victims in this process. No one's forcing us. No one's twisting our arm behind the back. What we're trying to do is make a decision based on reasonably accurate information. 2, Bethesda is demonstrably successful and good at this. It's hard to argue that from a cultural or a gaming perspective that over the past 2 decades, they have not been very successful. Their recent acquisition by Microsoft is one of the most clearest indicators within modern human society that their success is recognized and has specific value. 3, the best decisions we can make are generally based on facts and data, not speculation, and not fear and panic that's being buoyed about the internet by people who may or may not have an agenda. 4, I have biases, and I will explain those. The easiest and simplest bias to explain is the fact that I'm a creator on YouTube, and it means I would probably buy all this content just to show it to you anyway, and I hope to do that. So even if you have decided not to buy any of this yet, or ever for that matter, and you're considering it, you should be able to watch the content that I put out and make some kind of reasonably informed decision as to whether it looks interesting to you or not. And finally, I'm not going to tell anybody to buy content or not buy content. My real goal here is just to apply some analysis, provide you with some data, and some ways to look at this, ways to frame these things, and decide whether you are interested in them or not. So with that, let's get moving. So the question that came to mind for me was, first and foremost, is the DLC priced appropriately? But in order to answer that question, I needed to go back and ask myself whether the games themselves were priced appropriately at all. Now, fortunately for me, I have been buying games for a long time. And so I've gone back in the table that you can see on the screen right now to 2006 and the release of Oblivion. I remember buying Oblivion. I'm pretty sure I bought it on 2 platforms, both an Xbox at the time and PC. And the pricing for Oblivion, although it's not in Steam, we could go back and I found an article in Engadget. The pricing was at $59.99 for the standard edition, and there was a collector's edition, which I think was $10 more. But I wanted to be able to look at this information and decide whether a game price in 2006 is a different price if it was released today. And I needed to be able to look at that and compare that to games that have been released over time. And you can see from this chart, I picked 4 games. Those games are Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout 4, and Starfield. And the process here, if we go from left to right, is to list those games, and then we'll get to some of the DLC as well. But then going from top to bottom, I'm going to go from the year 2006 through the year 2024. I use the data up through 2023 in the calculations in the individual cells of the spreadsheet. So if I look at Oblivion at launch at $59.99 and I roll that forward year by year, its modern price would be $93. Now, we know that Bethesda or any game company is not going to increment the game price by $1.92 on a year-to-year basis. Prices are actually kind of sticky, and they might stay at a certain point for a while, and they might change at the next release, etc., etc. And we also know that these games, especially the 3 that have already been out for a long time, have gone through multiple cycles of discounts. So for those of you who are buying on Steam, you know that a game that has been out for an extended period of time is going to become available, and in a lot of cases is going to be heavily discounted around the holidays or during the summer and special sales that Steam does. So what I'm using are the original prices of the games, the price that the game was offered to the public when it was launched. And I do the same thing for the DLC. What we can clearly see across 4 titles is that from 2006 to 2023, Oblivion was at $93 if expressed in today's dollars, inflation adjusted. Skyrim launched at $49.99, which was a pretty good price compared to Oblivion just a few years earlier. But if we rolled that forward, is just under $70 today. Fallout launched at $59.99 in 2015. If we roll that forward, is around $77 today. And Starfield launched last year with a base cost of $69.99. So the first question I ask myself is Starfield reasonably priced in the first place? Probably is from a historical perspective. Now, we could have an entirely separate discussion about the cost of producing these games. I'm not going to do that here, but I will note that from my initial research, Oblivion was listed at around a $10 million development cost. Recent discussions about Starfield put that number closer to $400 million, and if you look at the discussions around Skyrim and Fallout along the way, they kept going up over time. So the cost to produce these games is dramatically higher than it's ever been, and yet the price to a consumer in inflation-adjusted terms is actually lower than one would expect it if we went all the way back to Oblivion. So as I move across this table from left to right, you may notice there's a very long column titled Mehrunes Razor. This was a DLC that was released back in 2006 for the Oblivion game. I remember buying it. It was released at $2.99, and if I inflation adjust that forward, that content would be released at $4.65, probably rounded up to $5 today. That's worth keeping in mind as we compare the others. Hahhbaah for Fallout 4 was released in 2016, as was Nuka World. I have a separate chart, and we'll go talk about that in just a moment, about the DLCs for Fallout 4, because they're fairly recent and a pretty good comparison of what type of pricing was employed. Now, I've seen multiple people say that Hahhbaah cost them $15. I suspect that was a discounted price because if I go to fandom.com, which is a relatively well-sourced wiki on the subject of Fallout 4, it lists the original price at $25 or $24.99. Nuka World was at $19.99. I roll those both forward, adjust them for inflation, and we come up with $32 and $25 respectively. And on the far right, in the last column, we have the Trackers Alliance Vulture TLC, which was released at $7, and we'll talk about that one as well. But first I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the Fallout 4 DLC, because I went back in time to the same wiki, and I'll include the links in the description, and I looked at all the DLC that's been released for Fallout 4. I looked at the dates it was released, and I looked at the price that it was released at. What we can see from this list is that the prices at release ranged from $5 effectively up to $25. Now I've added one more source of data into this chart, and it's a website called How Long to Beat. Many of you may be familiar with it already. And the great thing about How Long to Beat is that it is arguably a fairly objective website. It's unlikely that people are gaming the system or misreporting data or trying to make content that was 8 years old look bad. So we can go to it and we can get some pretty reasonable data on the top level metrics associated with a particular piece of downloadable content. In this particular case, How Long to Beat shows us how long it takes to play the main quest plus sides. They show what people report as their completionist approach, and then they give us an all styles, which I generally interpret to be an average, but I'm not going to use it, so we'll just list it here but not have to talk about it much. In a lot of cases, people buy the DLC and they play it for far longer than somebody else plays it for. And in those cases, your cost per hour for the entertainment value is dramatically lower. But if we go at the minimum level and we just look at what it takes to get through the main quest, we have pretty good data that's available on How Long to Beat for the Fallout 4 DLC. So I'm going to focus on two specific DLCs, Hahhbaah and Nuka World. These are the most expensive DLCs at $24.99 and $19.99. How Long to Beat lists the time to complete these specific DLCs as 7 hours and 11 hours. If I do a simple calculation, what that comes out to is $1.82 per hour for Nuka World, or $3.57 per hour for Hahhbaah. Keep in mind, these are in values from 2016. When we go back to the other chart, we'll see what that relates to in 2024 dollars. So if we return to this chart, which is the cost of Bethesda games and DLC over time, inflation adjusted, I've already talked about Mehrunes Razor, which I inflation adjusted up to $4.65. And I've mentioned Hahhbaah and Nuka World, which are $32 and $25. If I apply the number of hours that we can find on the website How Long to Beat, 7 hours and 11 hours respectively, we see that the average cost per hour of entertainment for each of these titles in the Fallout 4 category is $4.59 an hour or $2.33 an hour. Now, some of you will immediately notice in the bottom right-hand corner that I have put 1.75 hours as the amount of time it takes to complete the Trackers Alliance content. I'll talk about that later in the video. But the immediate result is that the cost per hour of the content that was provided in the June update is around $4 per hour. That's lower than Hahhbaah, it's higher than Nuka World, it's higher than Mehrunes Razor when adjusted for inflation. So having looked at the historical value of games and what they would cost us today, and looked at several DLC items, their launch price and what the equivalent would be today, and comparing those to the amount of raw time that one would spend being able to play those, the other area I wanted to look at before proceeding was at the mod ecosystem as a whole. And when I say mods, I'm referring to the creations that are in the creation store, and I'm talking about mods in other places. So the first place I'm going to look is at NexusMods.com. Between 2 editions of Skyrim, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, and Starfield, we're well over 200,000 mods at this site. So this is a pretty good place to take some initial points of data and determine whether Starfield has a mod problem. As you might expect, I copied these into a spreadsheet so I could do a couple of simple calculations on them. And primarily what I wanted to know was, given the number of years or months that have passed since the game was launched, if the rate of mod development and publication gives us any insight as to whether this game has good mod support. And I realize that's actually a very subjective decision, but I'm really just going to go for a very high level cut against this thing. My take on this at this point in time is that with 7,600 mods for Starfield, only out for 9 months, the rate of mod development is about 844 mods per month. If I go back to Fallout New Vegas and the number of months and years that it's been out, it has about 259. Same thing as I go back further into Skyrim, 385. Skyrim, the Skyrim Special Edition is at 724, which is pretty close. Now, I don't know between Skyrim, the 2 editions of Skyrim, how many of those mods have been, let's say, recompiled and re-released and are duplicates between the 2 platforms. Ultimately, all I really want to know is the rate of mod development and publication for Starfield on par with what we see in other games? And I don't have any concerns based on this. I do think you can do some very high-level comparisons here. So, for example, if we look at Skyrim from 2011, where there are 60,000 mods, and we look at Starfield with 7,600 mods, there's roughly a 9x, 10x difference between the two. If I look at monthly downloads of 29 million a month, and I just divide that by 10, that's 2.9 million a month. If I look at Starfield, our monthly downloads are 5 million a month. Those aren't off by an order of magnitude, and it seems normal that Starfield downloads would be higher at this point in time, given that it's a new game. Skyrim downloads from the original version are still really healthy, but it doesn't provide me with any concerns about Starfield mods, the modding community, or the amount of mods that are being used by people at this point in time. They seem to be in line. Okay, so the last stop on assessing the health of the mod community is to look at the creations that were just launched a week ago. And this is brand new information, and frankly, a week is almost not enough time to make any real determinations on. However, the Bethesda store does give us a ranking by popularity. I believe it's ranked by the number of thumbs ups or likes, essentially, on a mod. It's not purely ranked on the number of purchases or downloads. Now, Bethesda's website's a little confusing in my opinion. They do refer to these as plays and not downloads or purchases directly. If you look at the front page and you display it as a list, you will see a play indicator next to each one of the creations that are listed. And those numbers actually are considerably higher than the number that is listed next to the play indicator icon when you look at the mod or the creation itself. So, for example, if I'm looking at the list at the Starborn Gravis suit, which is the #1 most popular creation in the store, it says that it has 2,304,000 plays. If you open up that particular creation page by itself, there's a different listing for the number of plays, and it's 813,000. Now, I really just want relative comparable data. That's primarily what I'm after. It's not really important to me that it's 813,000 because I think 750,000 would be too low or something to that effect. I just want to be able to look at it and say something like the Starborn Gravis suit is a relatively low risk creation that people can add to their game. It's just a costume, just for your character. It doesn't change a lot of functionality around it. It doesn't have to interact with a tremendous number of things. And so if I look at it and I couple that with the fact that it has a price of 0, we can see that if 800,000 people have downloaded it, that's a nice baseline for comparison with other items. It is the most popular. That makes a lot of sense to us in a lot of different ways. The Observatory being less popular because fewer people perhaps build outposts and fewer people might actually know why they want this observatory. That makes sense as well. The Blackout Drumbeat skin, if you're not using a drumbeat in the game, you may pick up this skin, but you may not be using it. It's not going to be flying off the shelf. Now, the rest of the items in this list are not provided by Bethesda, except for the ones you see in the far right-hand column that say Bethesda. And I wanted to lift those as well because some of them have relatively low downloads, but they're very popular. Unlimited resources ammo, cheat room, improved follower behavior, things like that. It's good to know where those are at. I don't have an easy way within their store to look at just the paid mods, but I'd like to do that at some point in time in the future. Maybe I can discover it. When we get down to number 9 on this list, we see the Trackers Alliance, the Vulture paid DLC that is the source of so much controversy. We'll get back to that one later, but I did also want to add at the bottom of the list the 2 other paid Bethesda creations, the Ancient Mariner module and the Constellation plushie set. I wanted those both on there for 2 reasons. One is they don't seem to be controversial, and 2, they give us another set of data points for something that actually has a monetary value associated with it. The Constellation plushie set sells for $3 or 300 points, so it's $3 equivalent, and it looks like they have sold 55,000 of these, generating around 165,000 in revenue, equivalent revenue or not. We don't know if that's money that was spent based on creation credits that were included in premium purchases at the start, or if people swiped a credit card and added that at the last minute. The Ancient Mariner module is actually the most expensive paid module that they offer at this point, and it's $10. And I don't hear a lot of controversy about that one. It's interesting because I think people interpret it as being primarily a cosmetic module. However, it is very much a pay for convenience module once you get into it and you take a look around. There is a large storage chest in the Ancient Mariner module that gives you unlimited storage, just like the storage chests at the lodge do. So now, instead of having unlimited storage exclusively in your room at the lodge or in the basement in the crafting area, you can now place the chest that is part of your build menu, your outpost and ship decorating menu. You can place that chest in your ships or at your outposts and have unlimited storage at any place you want in the game. So Bethesda has introduced into a single player game a pay for convenience option in the form of an Ancient Mariner module and a specific chest. So it's an interesting data point, and only about 65,000 people appear to have purchased it at this point in time. The more interesting paid creation is the Trackers Alliance creation. And this specific item appears at this point in time to have sold 400,000 copies virtually. That makes it about a $2.7 million piece of downloadable content. Now, once again, we don't know how many people acquired this using the 1,000 creation credits that were included in their premium edition and how many people paid for it outright on top of that. But it's still a pretty good number, and it's higher than any of the other paid content that Bethesda has offered us. So I think from this measure, if I look at what's going on at NexusMods, the volume of mods that are largely free at NexusMods for the PC players only seems to be healthy and in line with the same monthly rates that we see across the entire Bethesda line. If we look at the creation store and what's happening just in the first week, these mods are selling as well, and there are quite a few mods that are very popular and still have brisk download rates that are coming from independent creators as well. I think having an independent mod creator environment supporting and flowing into the creation store is good for everyone. So at this point, we've looked at the historical pricing of Bethesda games in general. We've looked at the historical pricing of Bethesda DLC. We've rolled those prices forward using inflation adjustments so that we can see what they compare to today. And the ultimate result is that they're not out of line. The price for Starfield wasn't out of line in the first place, and the price for the DLC isn't out of line for first place. Now, we still have to address the issue of what are the comparables? Like, what is out of line compared to other forms of entertainment? And then I think there's some time I want to spend talking about the Trackers Alliance DLC as a whole, and not just the Vulture piece. So we can think about how it compares to the type of content we've seen in the past, so that at some point in time we can make a value judgment as to whether what they're offering is worth anything or if it's high, low, or otherwise. So what does any of this mean when it comes to deciding whether you're going to buy a piece of DLC or content? All I can do is share with you the way that I think about this. I look at the games I play, and I feel very fortunate because Steam gives me the ability to look at specific games and see exactly how many hours I've played them. And I look at those games and I ask myself, what am I paying per hour to play that game? And there are times, and it's not in the middle of the game, and it's not when I'm playing usually, but there are times when I look at a game and I say, that's far too expensive for me, given the amount of time I am not playing it. Starfield is not one of those games. My playtime in Starfield, just to be transparent, is over 1,400 hours at this point in time. Now, a percentage of that is time that I spend making videos that I can share with you. A lot of that time is me playing the game and just enjoying it. So my cost per hour of entertainment is at 7 cents an hour. Now, I have bought all the content that Bethesda offers, and when I add that into this cost, it does change my hourly cost for entertainment, but not by much. We're talking pennies per hour at this point, and that's just because I've played the game so much. And so it is naturally one of those things where if you have only played this game for a short amount of time and you keep buying additional content, your overall cost per hour is going to increase faster. If you've played this game quite a bit and you add some content in here or there, your overall cost for entertainment isn't going to move much. If you're one of the people who played Starfield for 23 and a half hours, did the main quests, and quote unquote beat it and walked away, your cost per hour for playing Starfield from the original purchase price of $69.99 is closer to $2.80 an hour. As a comparison, if you were to buy a paperback copy of Ender's Game and read that book at an average reading speed of about 250 words per minute, that book would cost you $1.60 to enjoy for the amount of time it takes. I think that's a fairly short read at 5 hours, 6 hours, something like that. If you play Starfield, doing the main quest and the side quests, according to how long to beat, and you put in close to 75 hours, you've broken below the $1 per hour mark as far as entertainment value goes. And this just occurred to me while I was doing this, but I recently watched the Shogun series that was released on streaming. And I remember reading the book Shogun long ago. It's a long book. And at the same reading rate, if I were to buy the Kindle version, which I think I can get for $10, reading Shogun would cost me about 47 cents per hour. I think it's 21, 22 hours to finish that book. Now, I'm of course not looking at the clock while I'm reading Shogun and trying to determine what my cost per hour is. However, occasionally when I want to step back and look at it and say, well, what am I paying for entertainment? What would I spend my time with? I do tend to balance things out. There are things that I do that are very low cost per hour, and there are things that I do that are very high cost per hour. If you look at the bottom of this list, and I'm not really a big golfer, but I did go out and look at the price of this Topgolf place that I've seen pop up here and there. They want $35 an hour to go hit golf balls off the third floor of a building into a large net. When I look at my own motorcycles and the amount of time I've ridden them, the distance, do some calculations here and there, and then I look at the overall costs, they cost me $25 an hour to operate. I don't really go to movies in the theater that often, so I went ahead and I looked up Garfield, because it seems to be out right now. And movies at this point in time are almost $7 an hour before you buy an overpriced drink or popcorn. When we get to things like Netflix, using average consumption data that was published in 2020 during the height of a very specific event we won't talk about in detail, the average amount that people are paying per entertainment hour on Netflix, if they're watching about 100 hours a month, is close to 16 cents an hour. That's not too far off of the data that World of Warcraft publishes when they say that their players are playing about 25 hours a week. If you look at the monthly subscription price for World of Warcraft, it's in that same range as well. So that's a fair amount of data. The question that still comes back is, what is the value of the DLC that Bethesda has just offered to the public? the Trackers Alliance DLC. Now, if you remember earlier, in the chart where I was listing the DLC and what the values were and what the equivalent cost per hour was for something like Hahhbaah, or for Nuka World, or for Mehrunes Razor, I included Trackers Alliance, and I listed it at 1.75 hours. And on this chart, I'm listing why I think it's at 1.75 hours. I am, of course, disregarding the argument that the $7 charge is exclusively for a 15-minute quest. First of all, because it's not a 15-minute quest. You can watch my videos and you can see how long it takes to actually play through that quest. The 15 minutes is some kind of strange misrepresentation that seems to be going around the internet. I'm not real worried about that. It's just not true. However, the framing that I apply to this is that the entire Trackers Alliance content system is what I was given in the June update. And much like at the end of a meal when I assess the value that I have received from the service staff, when I'm deciding what my tip is, I'm looking at the value of the entire DLC at this point in time. And I'm looking at it and thinking, Bethesda gave us a certain amount of value in the first part of this that they didn't charge anybody for. I don't think that was a mistake on their part. I think they knew exactly what they were doing. They also believe that if they give us access to that, or they give people access to that, even if they don't buy it today, that they are much more likely to buy content in the future. Only time will tell. Regardless of that, I'm looking at an entire list here of all the things that they have provided within the Trackers Alliance DLC. And that starts with the moment the unnamed tracker arrives outside the lodge or Sidonia or wherever you happen to meet her, and she invites you to come join the Trackers Alliance. That involves the trip there, the entrance to the Trackers Alliance headquarters, the first floor, which is the only place you can go until you actually complete the first mission and then you unlock the basement. That includes the new Astra currency, the new functionality for your scanner so you can find bounties. It includes the first quest and the second quest. It includes the ability to trade Astras for legendary gear on demand, which is pretty significant as well. And it includes the 3 options on the second quest as well. So when I total all that stuff up, and you can go watch the videos that I've already published, that is an hour and a half, or that's easily an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of content. I didn't rush through it, but I also don't think I spent all the time in the world looting and exploring everything that was out there. I just took kind of a casual pace to get through it. So the actual amount of time is probably closer to 1.5 to 2 hours. And if I compare that to the cost of the second part of the DLC, which is the only part they've even suggested that people pay for at $7, it's well within the range of $2 to $4.50, $5 that we see in DLC consistently. If I actually look at it as a total package of content and I total it all up, I probably would have personally paid more than $7 for the entire thing. Bethesda could have made the entire thing inaccessible to anyone unless they paid for it. That was a choice on their part. You can decide whether that's valuable or not to you. I'm not terribly concerned about $7, and that's me personally. And as I told you in my bias, I would have paid for all of this content anyway, so I could share it on the channel. However, I'll also note that I've seen people piss away $7 a day at Starbucks and 100 other places. When I look at my comparables, there are so many other things that $7 doesn't really cause me a lot of concerns from a raw dollar value. Now, there is one really strong argument I have heard about how to compare the value of DLC or content. And this was from a family member who said to me, there are a lot of really great games available, older games on Steam that you can pick up for $5. Some of those games are multiplayer. And if you haven't played them yet, you don't know if one of those games is going to turn into a 500 or a 1,000 hour game for you, or if they're a multiplayer game, if they're going to be just 10 times the fun because you're going to play it with 4 or 5 other friends. That's an incredible argument in my opinion. It still comes back to this. If you like Starfield and you like the content and you want more of it, making a decision on the type of content that you're looking at and whether it looks interesting seems like a good choice in my book. I don't buy into the exaggerated claims about the value of $7 and whether it's too much or this, that, and the other. And I don't spend much time imagining the future. And I've been very fortunate since 2006 that Bethesda hasn't beaten down my door and forced me to buy 17 sets of horse armor. It's just not happened. Each time I'm offered a choice, I get to decide whether it's useful to me or not. And so far it's been reasonable, and it's only been 2 decades. I personally don't have a high expectation that that's going to change in the future, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about it. I do suspect in the future I will be offered more content with a price tag associated with it. I will have the ability to make that decision at that point in time. I hope I'm still providing content for everybody, so that decision will be easy for me. I'll just pick it up and show you what's in it. But I think I'm going to follow the same process that I've outlined here, even if I'm not producing content for online consumption. So that's it. That's everything I can think of about this DLC. I've played it for you. I've put it out in videos. I'll have links to those in the description as well. I'm very interested to know whether you are going to buy this or not. I'm not bothered if you don't. It is your choice. I'm not even bothered if you look at the way that I've bundled it all together and decided that it's one piece of DLC and you don't agree with that. That's okay. You're welcome to worry about the future or not worry about the future. You're welcome to play this content or not play this content. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Remember, simplicity is an exact medium between too little and too much. It is the final achievement, the crowning reward of art. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and get notifications. This is Kineer, and I'm out of here.